Hello and happy Valentine's Day. Let's talk about some books instead, eh? Hi friends, and welcome back to No Book Left Behind. I'm your host Mark, and this is my mid-February Reading Roundup video. Now, if you've been following the channel, you'll know that at the start of the year, my entire TBR was 243 books, and that was causing me some storage problems, as well as just being too many and rather silly. So I put myself from the 1st of January on a Read What You Own challenge, whereas I was only going to read books that I've already got in my TBR. Nothing else. I'm not going to buy any books. I'm on a book buying ban. And if I do buy a book, that adds 5 more books to the challenge, which is simply put to get through 100 books before I buy any new ones. So, first month in January, I got on spectacularly well and read 11 books. So 243 became 232. So the question was, how well would I do in February? Could I keep the momentum going? Well, not through the first half of the month anyway. Because in the first half of February, I've read only 3 books. And that's kind of disappointing. But I'm hoping to pick it up over the next couple of weeks. Wish me luck with that. But today I'm going to be talking about the 3 books that I have managed to read. And the first of those is another in the British Library's Tales of the Weird collection, the 8th one they published. And this is The Weird Tales of William Hope Hodgson. Now, I have to own up straight away, I'm a massive William Hope Hodgson fan. Now, I'm not sure if I've read everything he ever wrote. It's got to be close, but I haven't kept a record, so I don't know. Not precisely. But I do own those wonderful Nightshade editions, which came out quite a number of years ago. It supposedly is entire works. It's in 5 big hardbacks. It cost me a fortune, and they're all sitting down there on my TBR. So I've not actually read them, which, considering they've cost me more than any other books I've bought, especially one volume. Yeah, it's ridiculous that I've not read them. And I am going to get round to that this year, or at least make a start at it. But in the meantime, we've got this selection from the Tales of the Weird, the British Library publications. So I didn't have to buy this paperback. Let's be honest, I've already got these stories elsewhere. So, yeah, but hang on. I mean, look at this artwork. It's so cool, isn't it? Look, with the danger of mucking up the focus on the camera, just take a look at that. That is just superb. So cool. And I'm a bit of a collector, I'm afraid. I try not to be. I fight it. I really do. But yeah, I'm kind of collecting these books now. So yeah, so I picked it up anyway. What you've got here is you've got 10 tales, I believe it is. Or is it 11? Damn. 10. It's definitely 10. Yes, it's definitely 10, thinking about it, yeah. And of these 10 stories, 4 of them are selections from his Carnacki the Ghost Finder series. And if you're not familiar with those, Thomas Carnacki is a guy who hunts ghosts, or rather he investigates supernatural happenings. You call him in the same way you would call in a private eye, basically, to make an investigation if you've got a haunting or something similar, a supernatural happening. And these are 4 stories from that series, which was originally published in 1910 to 1912. There were 6 in total at that point, and 3 were published posthumously in the 1940s. And we've got a selection of 4 of them in this British Library volume, and it includes 2 of my absolute favourites, Horse of the Invisible and The Hog. Now, these are wonderful tales. I love these. One of the particular things I like about them is the explanations are not always supernatural. Sometimes they're actually quite ambiguous even, so you don't know if they were supernatural or not. And I like that about these tales. It gives them a sense of unpredictability. You never quite know how they're going to turn out. And as I say, I'm a big fan of those, and I've read them many times, so coming back to them again, as I say, it seems kind of redundant, but it's part of the series, so what the hell, I bought it anyway. The other 6 tales in the volume are more of Hodgson's nautical supernatural stories. In real life, Hodgson was a sailor, so a lot of his tales are set on the sea. We've got some gems here. Voice in the Night's here. The Derelict is here. Those are two of my absolute favourites. And we've also got The Thing in the Weeds, which is another one that I love. So yeah, this is a great collection. There's no doubt about it. I find it difficult to rank it in terms of the other volumes in the series, simply because I already knew the stories. And I come to the Tales of the Weird typically to find new things of writers that I hadn't previously encountered, or ones I'd heard of and never had a chance to read. So that's kind of what I'm into the series for. So it seems a bit weird picking up a volume where it's a kind of greatest hits, if you like, of a particular author I already love. But it's a very solid introduction to Hodgson if you've not read him before, so I would definitely recommend it. It's a very good way to try him out and see what you think. So after that, where did I go next? Well, next up was this rather hefty tome, which is I'll Sleep When I'm Dead, The Dirty Life and Times of Warren Zevon. And if you're not familiar, Warren Zevon was an American singer-songwriter who was active through the 1970s to the early 2000s. And he's probably best known these days for his song Werewolves of London, although he was someone who was always much more popular and admired by his musical contemporaries and critics rather than the general public, although it's fair to say he was far better known in America than he was over here in the UK. Now, this book has been written by his ex-wife Crystal, well, or should I say rather compiled, because what she's done is she's gone through Zevon's entire life, tracked everyone down and interviewed literally dozens of people to share their memories and insights into Zevon and his life. And that includes ex-musical partners, business partners, many girlfriends, but generally friends and family as well. Basically, she's left no stone unturned to present a warts and all picture of the man. And this was something that they discussed before his death and something that he was very keen on. He wanted the warts and all depiction, and wow, he certainly got it. That's all I can say. Because Warren certainly had a very interesting personality. For the last 17 years of his life almost, he was completely clean and sober. And yet even then he displayed certain unusual behaviours which would keep an army of psychologists and psychiatrists busy for many a long day. As well as pretty wild mood swings, he demonstrated some rather extreme OCD behaviour. For example, he had things like good luck drinking glasses and good luck utensils and things of that nature. A friend recounts a story about how you would bring him 10 bottles of Coke and he would open them all, and by listening to the sound that they made as they opened, he could tell which was the good luck bottle, and that was the only one he would drink from. My favourite of these behaviours, though, was the T-shirt behaviour, because what he would do is when he was on tour and he would go to a new city, he would go to whatever stores he could find that stocked Calvin Klein grey T-shirts, and he would clear out the stock in the particular size that you wanted, just buy them all. And this wasn't a thing where he would wear them for one day and then throw them away. You might think that's strange, but not unreasonable. But no, Zevon didn't do that. What he would do is just keep them all in the wrappers as if they were collectibles. And apparently when he died, he literally had hundreds of them. So maybe you can imagine what he was like before he became clean and sober in the early part of his musical career and adult life, when he was taking copious amounts of drink and drugs on an almost daily basis. Yes, he was almost completely out of control. He was rude and abusive to friends, family, musical colleagues, business colleagues. He was completely neglectful of his children to a shameless extent, and he cheated endlessly on his wife, who kept taking him back even after he became violent and would knock her around. It's a disturbing portrait of some pretty disgusting behaviour. Some of the things he did, though, were so bizarre that you can't help chuckling at them. One of his friends, for example, came round one time to visit him and found that there was this huge hole in the bathroom floor. And this had apparently been caused because Zevon had spent the previous night lying in the bath taking shots at cockroaches with his .357 Magnum. To be fair, he did try to make amends for a lot of this in later life, and even in his darkest days he was still capable of surprising acts of generosity and kindness. But yes, it's fair to say that few people escaped his orbit unscathed, particularly in those earlier times. So this is a fascinating portrait of a very gifted but very troubled and very complicated man. Sometimes you sigh, shake your head, sometimes you're faintly repelled, and sometimes you're laughing because he's doing something particularly crazy and wild. But in the end, this is well worth a read, and I would personally recommend it most highly. So the last book I managed to read in the first half of February was this one, the second Hammer Horror Film Omnibus by John Burke, which was originally published in 1966. Now, if you've been watching earlier videos, you'll already see that I've actually already talked about the first omnibus, which was also written by Burke, and I think came out either a year earlier or the same year. And this is a collection of 4 short novels based on Hammer horror movies, all of which I think came out in 1966. We've got The Reptile, The Plague of the Zombies, Rasputin the Mad Monk, and Dracula, Prince of Darkness. Now, I think these were all specifically written for this omnibus, or the 2 omnibus. Well, do you call them omnibuses or omnibusi? I suppose it's omnibuses. It's a bit clunky, but I guess that's it. I think all these short novels were written for these 2 volumes because I can't find any record of any of them coming out in their own right or under other editions. And I think that's unlikely too, because these novels are pretty short. I mean, each of them runs slightly less than 100 pages. And inevitably, because of that, I think you get 2 things. The first thing is they do feel a little bit rushed in comparison with, well, what you might call a normal novel, I guess. And the other thing is that there is no opening out of the story from basically the bare bones you get in the screenplay and the events you saw play out on the screen. Now, these novelizations, I think, served 2 purposes. Firstly, as publicity for Hammer Horror and their brand and future movies that were coming out, but also as a way for fans to relive the experience of watching the film. Because back then, we were pre-home entertainment, we were pre-even VHS. It still wasn't going to be around for about 15 years, give or take. And back in those days, we in the UK, as far as I'm aware, I think we only had 2 TV channels. I don't think BBC 2 had started at that point. I think all we had was BBC 1 and ITV, and those 2 channels didn't even broadcast 24 hours a day. They would close down around midnight time, and I think, if I recall correctly, and yeah, I'm getting old that I can remember this, I believe they didn't even broadcast in the afternoons. I think what used to happen was you'd have like the news at around midday, maybe a news magazine program, and then everything would go dark for several hours until the kids started coming home from school and you'd get some children's entertainment. So yeah, it was a different world back then, and film novelizations were a way of filling this gap, because I can't imagine that many films actually got shown at this point at all, and I wouldn't have thought Hammer horror films particularly would be something that either channel was looking to pick up and show. Now, these are all very efficient and smartly written. Burke certainly has a way with words, and they do the job as intended. My particular favourite is The Reptile. I think it's the best one of the 4 novels here, and indeed the best one of the 8 Hammer horror novelizations that Burke wrote and put into these 2 omnibus editions. And that's because The Reptile takes place in a very isolated region of Cornwall. And Burke really manages to convey an otherworldliness to this location, a really creepy atmosphere, which he doesn't really manage in The Plague of the Zombies, which is set basically in the same place. Although not officially, Hammer did make those 2 films back to back. So yeah, the actual same locations appear in both. But it's in the novel of The Reptile where he really nails that and puts that across. Ironically, in the films, it's actually Plague of the Zombies, which is the more creepier and atmospheric. Now, one of the stated reasons Hammer had for publishing these novelizations was that they were supposed to go further with the sex and the gore on the printed page, further than you could go on the screen. Now, I don't think there's that much evidence for this if you actually read the books. There's a scene in Rasputin the Mad Monk where there's a suicide and you actually witness it rather than hearing about it later on. And there's also a sequence in Dracula Prince of Darkness when his manservant Clove uses an unwary traveller to revive his master. And that's far gorier in the book than it is in the film, but that's just a one-off. There's no other replication of that really anywhere else. Now, watching the movies again before I read the books was a highly enjoyable experience, and I was surprised at how well they've stood the test of time, a tribute to the craftsmanship and professionalism involved in their production. However, watching the film of Dracula Prince of Darkness again and reading the book has left me with some unanswered questions, particularly revolving around the role of his faithful manservant Clove. Now, as the story begins, Dracula's been off the scene for quite some years after being originally destroyed by Professor Van Helsing, but Clove's been keeping the castle in tip-top shape. Now, the man also seems to have some kind of psychic ability, because he's able to send a driverless horse and carriages down to the crossroads to pick up some unwary travellers, one of whom he tends to use in order to revive his master. Now, the first question here that strikes me is, why has he waited years to do this? That would seem particularly a bit of an oversight for a faithful old retainer. Also, why doesn't he just go into the local village and kidnap someone? If all he needs to do is hang them upside down over the coffin and let some blood onto Dracula's ashes, wouldn't anyone just do? I mean, the person he picks for the job is not anyone very remarkable in any way, so why not just some local villager? And of course, that perennial problem, why does a vampire like Dracula, who has no human needs and sleeps in a coffin, need to have a castle full of fine furniture, beautiful antiques, and 4-poster beds? Always a puzzle, that one. Also, I couldn't help noticing in the film that the decor of the castle also features 2 crossed swords mounted on the wall. Now, they're not in the shape of a crucifix, they're not at 90 degrees to each other, so yeah, sure, that's not so bad, but you think Dracula's interior decorator would have shown a little bit more sensitivity. So that's it for today's video. Thank you for staying with me right the way to the end. Obviously, I've got to try a little bit harder in the remainder of February to read some more books. We'll see how that goes. But in the meantime, please don't forget to like, subscribe and ring that notification bell if you're enjoying the content I'm putting out on the channel. So, have you read any of these books? What did you think of them? More importantly, have you got any more recommendations for me for things that I could read and review on the channel? I'd love to hear from you. And in the meantime, please don't forget to keep searching out those second-hand bookshops in those narrow side streets of your town, visiting those charity drives, those market stalls and car boot sales, because there are treasures out there that only you can find. Be seeing you.